Hello everyone, I'm bringing you a video today looking at Dutch entrenching tools, and this is another video looking at the development of kits. So we'll be looking at the earlier issue entrenching tool, post-war entrenching tool, and the later issue entrenching tool. So this covers sort of post-war, Cold War Dutch kit and the two patterns of entrenching tool that we used during that period. And we'll look at the covers that we used with these as well. We'll have a look at these in some detail now. So the first entrenching tool we're going to have a look at here is basically a copy of the Second War German folding entrenching tool, and it's in the first version of the cover design for use with this entrenching tool. And this cover is also somewhat similar to the German design for their folding entrenching tool as used during the course of the Second World War. This was introduced, I believe, in the early 1950s alongside the new Dutch produced web equipment which was introduced around that time. And it's a mix of leather and webbing, the cover. We'll have a look at the entrenching tool itself first of all, but opening up the cover does show you how this works. To get at the entrenching tool, it's held in place by a lifter dot, which is a bit stiff. I don't remember it being that stiff before. There we go. A lifter dot fastener with a webbing strap that passes over the top, and this leather strap that passes around the front to secure it in place. So the entrenching tool, as you can see here, is a very close copy of the German design, including the end of the handle here, the shape of the handle, as you can see. It's a very, very close copy of the German Second War era design. And the way this works, of course, is basically exactly the same. You have two positions in which you can lock the head. So we screw this back in position here. You have a mattock, as you can see there, so you can use this as a mattock, or you can swivel it right round and use it as a small shovel like that. So many other nations did take inspiration from the German folding design, but as you can see, this is basically a straight copy. Even in some of the smaller details, this is very, very similar to the German design. And of course, it functions in exactly the same manner as shown. And it's a good design overall, certainly better than the three-way folding entrenching tool that came in later on. So just fold that back down again. Have a look at the cover here. Just screw that back up so it's locked in position. So the cover is made of a piece of coarse webbing, and this interestingly shows the Dutch dark green Blanco. This is made of a sort of 1937 pattern grade of webbing, I guess you could say, quite coarse grade of webbing, whereas the strap that comes over the top is more like the grade of webbing used with 1944 pattern. It's a slightly finer weave, as you can see there. The strap attaches to the back and also forms the loop for the hanger hooks. So this hangs from the belt using eyelets per the M1910 equipment, which obviously influenced the Dutch equipment in the use of canteen carriers and so forth. So the entrenching tool attaches to the equipment in the same way. And you can see here there's a section of leather attached to that webbing strap where it rubs on the top of the entrenching tool. So that's very sensible, means that that wear point is well strengthened. You have these bright brass lifter dot fasteners there, as you can see. Obviously we have a British style brass tip to the webbing there, riveted in place but with solid rivets rather than hollow rivets. And then we have the strap that passes over the front here with a lifter dot there, and then the lifter dot for the webbing strap coming over the top. The male section of that is on that leather strap. So we slide this back in here. You have to open up both straps. In the head of the entrenching tool slots down inside the leather like that. Fasten the strap across the handle like that, and then the top strap comes down just to fasten on, as you can see there. So as I say, it's similar in some respects to the German folding entrenching tool carrier. This is the first pattern of cover, first Dutch manufactured cover for this entrenching tool, I believe. Certainly seen in the 1950s and into the 1960s. And quite an interesting design, and a little bit overcomplicated, and for that reason a simplified version of this would be introduced, and we'll have a look at that next. Just before moving on to look at the next pattern of entrenching tool cover, I want to show a period photograph here which does show this pattern of entrenching tool cover in use in the 1950s, with troops looking on at a somewhat stranded Centurion tank, as you can see here, which has got itself rather bogged down, but the men are carrying the entrenching tools slung from their belts, as you can see. So we're moving on to look at another cover now. The entrenching tool we have in here is the same one we looked at previously, but this is the slightly later webbing cover, which is basically again a copy of US practice. It has only a single fixed hanger hook in the back there, as you can see, but it is, other than some minor detail differences with the shape, basically based on US Second World War practice for the M1943 entrenching tool. So slide the entrenching tool out of here and have a look at the cover. As you can see here with the flap open, we have various reinforcement points. Here we have webbing and rivets on the side here to reinforce the edge here where the head of the shovel is going to rub. We also have webbing reinforcement here where the blade, the head, is going to rub, and obviously a strip of webbing here where it comes over, folds over the top, which is another wear point which requires strengthening and reinforcement. We have a blackened lifter dot fastener, as you can see, and rivets reinforcing down here. Looking at the back of this, you can see we have those rivets on each side there, and here, as we saw from the front. The single M1910 style hanger hook in the middle there, in a fixed position, as you can see. And then we actually have a nice clear marking on this. We have the KL there for the Netherlands, Royal Netherlands Army. We have the NATO stock number up the top there, including the 17 for the Netherlands, obviously the national code. You then have what I believe to be a contract number here, and then the manufacturer, which is Front Strauss BV, and then 1976 being the date of manufacture for this particular cover. And overall, it's in really quite nice condition. There's a little bit of wear here at the top, a little bit of wear on the inside, actually corresponding holes, so that's worn through there. But otherwise, this is in really quite nice condition and a lovely thing to have in the collection. I think this was gifted to me by Kevin Mills, so thank you very much, Kevin. I believe it was part of the webbing you sent to me in the past. So it's a very nice thing to have, and a nice addition to the Dutch webbing that I have in my collection. I believe these were introduced in the 1960s. Now, I've had someone comment on a video saying they didn't appear until the 1970s. Obviously, this particular example is a 1970s dated example, but I've seen photographs of the Dutch Army from the 1960s that appear to show this pattern of cover in use. Now, I'll include a couple here. You can see one here, the Dutch soldier still using the M1 Garand, so this would be relatively early 1960s. And as I say, as far as I'm aware, these covers were introduced in the 1960s, certainly used through into the 1970s with the folding entrenching tool we've looked at here, of course, when it was carried. And on the subject of how these were carried, I want to mention something here. Obviously, one of the photos there showed this just carried on the belt like this with the entrenching tool hanging down. They were quite often flipped, and the handle of the entrenching tool would poke upwards, would face upwards, and the handle would then be tucked into the L strap of the haversack if it was being carried on the back, or otherwise could be tucked underneath the cross strap, of course, of the webbing to keep it up out of the way and carry it up away from the legs, which is quite convenient. So I have seen, I say there is evidence of both ways of doing this out there. I copied the former example with it hanging down below the belt for my video looking at a Dutch Bren gunner, but there are obviously many photos showing these carried the other way with the handle pointing upwards, and that's just something to note here. So sometimes carried this way with the handle pointing up, and sometimes you do see them carried with the handle pointing down as well. Variations there, but obviously a lot more convenient and comfortable to carry it with the handle pointing upwards and get it up away from the legs. So that's the two covers we're going to look at for this entrenching tool. Obviously we've had a look at this entrenching tool already. We'll move on now to have a look at the later three-way folding shovel and its carrier. So what we're going to look at here is probably familiar to many of you. This is the three-way folding shovel inside a rubber cover, and we're going to talk about this in some detail now, but I'm sure it is familiar to many of you. Obviously a US design originally. It was introduced by the Netherlands, introduced by Britain. Canada had a version of this, both the same sort of size as we have here and also an elongated version as well. And many countries adopted it with the rubber cover as we have here as well. Canada didn't. They had their own cover, but they did introduce a version of this folding entrenching tool. So almost became a NATO standard. It was quite a popular design. It is very compact, but really not very good as an entrenching tool, unfortunately. But it is very compact, much more compact than what we looked at before. It's about the size of the head of the folding shovel we looked at previously. The cover we have here is a direct copy of US practice, as is the entrenching tool. The entrenching tool had been initially introduced into US service with the M1967 equipment during the Vietnam War. Obviously that equipment was designed for use in the tropics. And then the shovel was actually standardized and introduced with the Alice equipment post-Vietnam, and obviously brought into US service in the 1970s. I think it also arrived in Dutch service in the very late 1970s. Possibly the 1980s. Anyone who can clarify that point, provide a date, I'd be interested to know. But to talk about this in more detail, we have this rubber outer cover, and I will remove The snaps here are quite stiff. There we go. I will remove the entrenching tool from it so we can look at both side by side. You can see we have two snaps or press studs there. You can see we have the Alice clips on the back here. These were sometimes dispensed with, but these are carried across from the US design for use with Dutch equipment and were just used to attach the carrier onto the back of the belt. They don't feature, I believe, on any other Dutch equipment of this period, sort of the late Cold War period, but they were retained for use with this. The rubber cover is moulded with these two slots to take the Alice clips, so it makes sense to use them rather than having the cover inside a carrier, which was the British way of doing things, which is really rather unnecessary. You can see down in there where the slots are moulded through for those clips on the back. Under the flap here you can see we have a very clear part of the moulding which gives the details at the top here. So you have the NATO stock number. Interestingly, this is the US NATO stock number, so includes the 00 national code there, as you can see, because this is absolutely identical to US issue covers. And in fact, it's completely compatible with US equipment. Of course, it uses Alice clips. So from the point of view of NATO stock keeping, the fact that it uses exactly the same code, including the national code, makes sense because it is an identical product, an identical bit of kit. You can see there that UNIC Plastics NED BV 91, and that is the date, I believe, of 1991 there. The tool itself folds out. We'll just have a quick look here. This has got an early 80s date and the KL marking there, KL82, as you can see. This opens out and then locks into position again with this screw here. In theory, you could also position the head as a mattock as well, as we saw previously. Serrations on the edge here. Obviously, this hasn't seen much use. It's still got most of the paint and so forth on it, which is nice. It's in good condition. A little bit of wear to the top there, but it's not seen a huge amount of use compared to some I've seen. And just unscrew this now, fold it back up again. It's a standard three-way folding shovel. There are loads of these around on the market. There's nothing particularly special about them. That central pivot is spring-loaded, and once you screw that into position, it locks it all together. When you want to fold it, you've got a bit of spring tension to overcome there, just to fold the handle back into position, and then that just sits like that, folded up. And it's a very neat design, but obviously not particularly good for digging. Very compact, but not actually very good as an entrenching tool. But it does, if you're going to have to carry something and not actually do much digging, at least you're carrying something small, I guess you could say. But if it actually does come to digging, they're not particularly useful. Certainly something like the British lightweight shovel and pick used with the 1958 pattern are far better digging tools, and indeed even the previous folding shovel used by the Dutch military had been a better design really from the point of view of digging a hole. But as I say, this is more compact. So there we are, that's a quick look through these Dutch entrenching tools. So I do hope you found it interesting looking at this. As I always say, if anyone can help with dates, I would be very appreciative of that. I've included photographs to give you some idea of when these items were used, when these different patterns were used in terms of the covers and the tools themselves. Obviously, if anyone can give more specific dates, I would be very interested to hear. But I believe, obviously, the initial cover made of leather and webbing used in the 1950s. The canvas cover, very similar to that US pattern for the folding shovel, introduced, I believe, in the early 1960s, and then obviously the three-way folding tool and its rubber cover introduced around the late 1970s. So if anyone can clarify those dates further, I'd be interested to know. And as always in the comments, it's always good to hear more information from people. I hope you found it interesting, as I say, and if you have, and you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below, and that will of course alert you when I upload future videos. That's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.